So we are going to take a look now at the DuPont Identity, which is really a combination of three of your ratios that you've learned in this chapter. Now, of course, it's called the DuPont Identity because it was popularized by DuPont Corporation. And it really illustrates how profit and assets and leverage interact and their effects they have on return on equity. So that is how much money how much money or percentage the company makes from the equity of the company. So the three major ratios that are used in the DuPont Identity to calculate return on equity are profit margin, which measures operating efficiency, how well the company produces a profit from its sales. So is it operating so that costs are lowest? Asset use efficiency, so how well the company uses every dollar of assets to generate sales. And then financial leverage, the equity multiplier. So basically how much how much in assets does a dollar of equity purchase? We're going to look at those three formulas and show how their relationship helps define return on equity. So remember, return on equity could be simply net income divided by total equity. So how much money does the company make profit? What kind of return is there on the equity, the money the shareholders give to the company? But if we rearrange this formula by multiplying it by 1, and 1 being total assets over total assets. So total assets over total assets. I'm sitting in a parking lot right now waiting for my husband, but total assets divided by total assets would equal 1. So we take net income divided by total assets times total assets divided by total equity. So that's where we essentially are taking the return on just the assets. So how much money does the company make for every dollar of assets? That's the net income divided by total assets times the amount of assets each dollar of equity purchases, and that's your equity multiplier. So there's two distinct ratios that we were able to form out of return on equity just by multiplying it by total assets over total assets. If we take it one step further and now multiply those two by sales over sales, another 1 number, now we have net income over sales times sales over total assets times total assets over total equity. We now have a return on equity using profit margin, turnover on total assets, and the equity multiplier. So that is how it has developed, just by multiplying our first formula by total assets over total assets, which would represent the number 1, and then multiplying that result by sales over sales. So we're just showing you the evolution. Where did it come from? That we could say profit margin times total asset turnover times the equity multiplier would provide us with our return on equity. So it's a different approach. So again, profit margin is a measure of the firm's operating efficiency. How well does it control the costs of the company? The higher the profit margin, the better control a company has on its costs, because sales minus costs will give us our profit margin. Total asset turnover is how well the company uses its assets, how efficiently it manages it to produce profit. And then the equity multiplier is a measure of the firm's financial leverage, meaning how much in assets does it buy with $1 of equity. So if we have a return on assets which remember, return on assets is net income divided by total assets. And we have a equity multiplier, which is assets divided by equity. We could then multiply those two together to get our return on equity, which would be 16.15%. You could take it a step further if you know profit margin is 18.09 and total asset turnover is 0.64. Now you can take your profit margin times your total asset turnover times your equity multiplier, and that will give you your return on equity of 16.15%. Now, a change in one could mean a change in another. For instance, we talk about the equity multiplier. If we raise debt, now our equity multiplier is decreasing, but you have to be careful because if we raise debt, interest will also change in the same direction, which will then affect our profit margin. So these don't operate in a vacuum, independent of one another. They're actually influenced by one another. But we want to show you just a different way of using these three efficiency ratios: profit efficiency, asset efficiency, and leverage, to determine overall return on equity, or how much, what percentage does the company make in profit basically for $1 of equity.